For the rest of class, what we're going to be looking at is having a new purpose here and looking at us being able to distinguish operant conditioning from classical conditioning. So when we get to the AP test, certainly you'll have to identify if it's negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement, or what the UCS is, the UCR. But you also may have to distinguish between classical and operant conditioning. And there's a way in which we can remember this. First, with classical versus operant, let's take a look at classical. And classical conditioning is going to depend on respondent behavior. And what I'd like you to add here, I didn't add it in and I need to, is respondent behavior is an involuntary response. Okay, so something that is going to be an involuntary response is going to be something that's physiological. Okay, so in this case, a dog drooling. A dog can't control its drool. If I get nervous and my palms start sweating, okay, that's a physiological response that I can't control. Anything with heart rate, anything with like flinching, okay, and or different ways of saying flinching, like backing away quickly, cowering, shivering. Those are all physiological responses. It also could be an emotional response. Okay, so an emotional response would be something like fear or happiness or sadness. And it also could be something like triggering a memory. Okay, so I can't help when I retrieve a memory. So here, what we're looking at is that the experimenter presents the UCS and the CS and then observes the behavior. There's no reinforcement occurring. Okay, so when we're trying to decide the difference between classical and operant, the first thing I'm going to see is the organism's behavior involuntary or is it voluntary? Okay, and then I'm going to look at what the experimenter is doing. Are the UCS and the CS being presented, and then there's an association happening. So the example I'd like to do here is it's going to be very similar for both, but if we can picture a family eating dinner at a table and there's a dog. Okay, they have a pet dog. If the dog is just sitting there and is looking at the family eating, okay, and starts drooling, that's classical conditioning. Here's what's probably happened. Okay, so the UCS is going to be the food, and then the CS is going to be the family eating, because the dog has learned to associate the family eating with getting food. So what happens? It's drooling in anticipation, okay, of getting the food when the family's done eating. Now, operant is operant behavior, and these are voluntary behaviors. Okay, so it's a voluntary behavior. The organism can control it. So anything that has to do with like running, raising your hand, barking is the example I'm going to talk about. Anything that the organism can control, okay, is going to be a voluntary behavior. So what this is the participant has to behave in a certain way and then gets a reward or avoids a punishment. So for this example, what I'd like to look at is looking at, again, the same scenario that a family is eating dinner. And when the family's eating dinner, the dog barks. And the brother of the family throws food at the dog. So it remains quiet. Well, the dog barked, okay, it got the reward. So now next time it's going to bark again so it can get food again. Okay, so this is operant because the dog can control barking. So another example of classical versus operant that we could look at is, I know some of us had talked about like the process of feeding our pet. Okay, that the pet is going to associate maybe you opening the door where the food is. Okay, so when the dog comes running, okay, that is an operant behavior. The dog can control running. Now, when it gets to you and it's excited and its tail is wagging, that's a classical conditioning example because the tail wagging in excitement is something that's an involuntary response. So what we're going to do is you're going to go to the practice on page 10 in the learning packet, and then the key can be found on Schoology or by clicking this link here. And I have, I think, about 10 questions. And what you're going to do is differentiate between classical and operant conditioning. Then you have to identify the positive, negative reinforcement, UCS, etc. And then I have 3 advanced examples where it actually is kind of multiple scenarios are going on. So you could try those as well.